Welcome into Locked On Knicks. Could Isaiah Hartenstein get paid $100 million over the course of his next contract? Reports say maybe. We'll talk about it right now on Locked On Knicks.
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, welcome in to Locked On Knicks. We want to thank you all for making Locked On Knicks your first listen today and every day, whether you're checking us out on your favorite podcast platform or taking in the sights and sounds on YouTube. We appreciate you making us a part of your daily routine. Make sure you hit that notification bell on YouTube or the auto download function on your favorite podcast app so you never miss an episode, because we are still here for you guys, typically around 5 days a week, even during the off season, because we just like you that much. I'm Alex Wolfe. I'm editor-in-chief of Knicks site, The Strickland, which you can find strict.land. And he's Gavin Schall, your favorite play-by-play broadcaster, favorite play-by-play broadcaster. And we're reunited after about a week of splitting up. I did some draft stuff. You talked to Howard Beck. Now we're back to talk about Isaiah Hartenstein together and some reports that have come out recently that suggest that he might be in for perhaps a bigger payday than the Knicks can afford to give him. So this was a note from Jake Fisher in one of his most recent columns, Gavin. He said league executives and cap strategists are projecting Hartenstein will be able to draw at least $80 million and perhaps upwards of $100 million from a team hoping to steal Hartenstein from Madison Square Garden. So the Knicks can pay Hartenstein 4 years, $72.5 million, which we sort of went over during like the luxury tax and salary cap primer last week when we were getting into all that. And so that's obviously less than 80 million and significantly less than 100 million for Hartenstein. So I don't know. I guess first, before we start getting into like teams that we're worried about possibly signing him away, because there are going to be some teams with some pretty hefty cap space this year. I mean, how do you feel about, I guess, first in a vacuum, if you were the Knicks and you had the ability to pay Isaiah Hartenstein $100 million over 5 years, do you think he's, or well, no, that would be 4 years, even more, because that's what he can get from another team. So if you could pay him $25 million a season, I mean, are you doing that, or do you think that's too much? I kind of go back and forth, if I'm being honest.
I think it's maybe a drop more than he's worth, but that's sort of the going rate. And we've kind of been privileged as Knicks fans to like have bargain contracts, right? Like we've talked about this a lot, but Jalen Brunson's the best contract in basketball. Dante DiVincenzo, Isaiah Hartenstein these last 2 years aren't too far behind him. And like on the bargain, like the real bargain end of contracts, like Deuce McBride, I think is that contract isn't going to be too far behind. So, but generally you're like, there's like just a 5 to 10% tax, like relative to value for most guys. And like, that is a 5% to 10% tax, because I don't know, is he worth 22 million? Is he worth, I think he's worth at least 20 million. He was second in the NBA in defensive EPM this season, as we highlighted. Like we can just go through why he's so valuable. Like you go back to the beginning of this year for the Knicks, Mitchell Robinson is probably the best player on the team through 8 games. And they were better with Isaiah Hartenstein out there. And obviously, look, there were other factors there, and it was like part of like how they reset the roster, and getting Anunoby was the most important thing. But it's also the fact that Anunoby just gave them like a little bit of floor spacing and like weaponized like all these different guys, from Deuce to Brunson to Dante to Josh Hart to Anunoby, once they got him, as off-ball weapons that just wouldn't be otherwise. And by sticking him up out of the perimeter and using him as a dribble handoff hub and using him as a passer, like you set up these situations where Brunson could go one-on-one. You look at the rebound he had against the Sixers, like that, like in terms of a combination of athleticism, instincts, hustle, and basketball IQ. It's a borderline top 25, 30 play in the history of the Knicks. And I think the thing that is blowing his value up that much more, that Jake talks about in the article, like who are the other free agency centers that get you going a little bit? Like there really aren't any. It is a player's market if you're a good center, and Isaiah Hartenstein is probably the best of them this year. So I think it's realistic he could command that much. And if the Knicks could, like, I wouldn't lose sleep over giving him $25 million a year. I don't know. Do you think that's too rich, considering they have Mitch, and like as great as he is, he's not a quote unquote star at the end of the day?
Yeah, I kind of go back and forth on that, because, if you go and you look at the highest paid centers in the league, right? Like you're looking at like Anthony Davis, Karl Towns, Nikola Jokic, Joel Embiid, Rudy Gobert. So let's just stop it at Embiid first. Those are all the centers that make higher than an average of 50 million on their contracts. So those are like your super maxes. I think one of those guys is not like the other. I'll let you determine who out of Davis, Towns, Jokic, and Embiid. But those are the guys that make the absolute most money at the center position. Then you got Rudy Gobert making 41 million. You got I don't know how this is possible, but because it's his last deal that he's currently still on. Anthony Davis on his current deal before his extension kicks in is making about 40 million. Then you've got DeAndre Ayton making 33 million. Bam Adebayo making 32.5. And then there's a pretty steep drop off to like the Brook Lopez and below tier. So we've got Brook Lopez at 24 million, Clint Capella at 23. We got Miles Turner at 20.5. Jared Allen making 20. You got Nikola Vucevic making 20 million as well. Jakob Poeltl making 19.5. Yusuf Nurkic making 17.5. Zach Collins making 17.5. I had no idea that he was making that much money. I mean, it's just kind of weird, right? It's a weird market because some of those names I say, no freaking way are they having more impact than Isaiah Hartenstein. Like, I mean, Collins for sure. Jakob Poeltl for sure. I would say Vooch definitely not. Like Jared
even in the higher paid tier, like he's better than Ayton. Like I don't think it's that close.
Absolutely. So I mean, it's kind of tough, like to place what his value is because he's never gonna like Ayton for for all of his flaws, like is more of like a point scorer, I guess, at his best, and like
for sure
gobbles up rebounds, which Hartenstein does at his best too. But I don't know, he's like more flashy, like more conventionally attractive, I guess, if you want to say it that way, like in terms of numbers and stuff. So it's tough to really like set the market. I would definitely probably pay up to 20 million for him. I think it just becomes a tougher pill to swallow when you combine him with Mitchell Robinson and then you say, okay, now now that you're talking about both of these guys, then you're paying like 35 million for the two of them. And neither of them is like a megastar. Granted, you could also look at that and say there's a DeAndre Ayton making over 30 million by himself, and you're paying about the same amount for both your centers that will give you a dominant offensive rebounder, just dominant rebounding presence in general, great interior defense. Mitch is a lob threat, Hartenstein is a floater threat, all that. Like, yeah, I think if it came down to it, like, and he was asking for 25, I would probably just try to talk him down as much as I could. But at the end of the day, if I was the Knicks and I had the ability to pay him that much, even with all the implications of the luxury tax and everything else, I think you just kind of got to go for it because that he would be tradable later on to some team with cap space if you needed to, like just for pure luxury tax perspective or whatever. But with him and with this whole team assembled as they were in January this year, you got to figure you could potentially be a title contender.
Yeah, and I think what you're looking at is like how easily is his production replaced in the draft, because that's where the center position has generally gotten undervalued, is that you can find someone like a Derek Lively, maybe not easily, but those guys are available 8 through 15. Like a Jalen Duren is maybe a slightly lesser example, but guys who can protect the rim, who are like, in the case of Lively, like shockingly savvy passers and our rim runners on the other end of the floor. Like, but is that worth the extra 20% Isaiah Hartenstein gives you, which is his passing ability? I think his instincts, I think his offensive rebounding being not just good, but elite. And I think that's somewhat covered up by the fact that Mitch is just in his own tier. People don't appreciate that. Yeah, Hartenstein's like one of the 6, 7, 8 best offensive rebounders in basketball. And I also think he gives you a baseline of really high level playoff defense. And that's sort of the thing that the Knicks have to think about going forward in terms of roster construction is like, all right, how valuable is that rim protection if 3 of the teams you're competing against in the Sixers, the Celtics, 4 actually, the Bucks and the Pacers all employ centers that can shoot threes and pull your guy away from the rim. And in a sense, like that almost points more to Hartenstein because he's a touch more comfortable than Mitch being out there on the perimeter. But I think some of that value that's there in the regular season, you lose a little bit in the playoffs in the East just because it takes away what those two guys do best, which is being at the rim, blocking shots and getting rebounds. But with Hartenstein, like you see the ability to like in the biggest moment of the season, switch on to Maxey, like track him and swat his shots. So like he still finds ways to be really effective. To me, like it's not really, it's not the number. It's like, all right, who would you be replacing him with? And personally, like if the Knicks were trying to penny pinch, I hate to say it, but I'd be a little more comfortable moving on from Mitch at this point than from Isaiah.
Yeah, well, it might not be up to them because there are going to be teams that will probably bid for his services and potentially try to massively outbid the Knicks, as we were just talking about with that huge number. So we'll talk about that in just a second. And what teams might be looking to swoop in and steal Isaiah Hartenstein from our beloved Knicks.
This show is sponsored by BetterHelp. We all carry around different stressors, big and small. When we keep them bottled up, it can start to affect us negatively. Therapy is a safe space to get things off your chest and go figure out how to work through whatever's weighing you down. I personally benefited immensely from therapy in my life. It helps so much to just be able to talk to someone else. And I think put things in perspective. And to me, the biggest benefit is just realizing like, all right, I'm not alone in going through what I go through. I'm not on an island with it. And there are people out there who have like empathy for your issues and are willing to talk you through them to the point that, all right, like it's instead of being this big thing, it's something you can actually approach and solve and move on and make your life a little bit better. If you're thinking of starting therapy, you should give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. So get it off your chest with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. You are back on Locked On Knicks. Alex Wolfe, Gavin Schall here with you. We're talking Isaiah Hartenstein, Alex. So there are 5 teams with the cap room to potentially make a play. It's 6 teams, and it could get as high as 8. I'm just adding teams. I'm hurting myself here. The Detroit Pistons. This is according to Keith Smith, who's probably the best in terms of NBA cap space projections. The Pistons are projected for $64.4 million. The Sixers are projected for $61.3 million. The Utah Jazz at $38.3 million. The Oklahoma City Thunder at $35.3 million. The Orlando Magic at $25.2. The Spurs at $21.2. And then Charlotte and Toronto, they have decisions to make. I think Charlotte on Miles Bridges, Toronto on Bruce Brown. The Hornets could get up to $33.8 million. The Raptors, $29.8. Alex, I know the Thunder, and I'm sure we're going to talk about them in depth. Up to you if you want to start with them, or the team that most people have thrown out there, and I think logically makes the most sense. Is there anyone else on the list that like kind of like your ears perk up a little bit and you say, you know what, they could be a dark horse to just go crazy and try and get him?
Well, I would say first the teams that I would eliminate. I think Detroit probably. I feel like with Troy Weaver gone, they're going to want to shake the stigma of we just pay for every center on the market every year,
or double down, or double down,
and just be
only
like,
center.
We can play Duren and Hartenstein at the same time, no problem. Yeah. So yeah, I feel like they'll want to lean into Duren. They'll probably be looking for like wings and guards more so. Philly, unless they really want like the ultimate insurance policy for Joel Embiid and his health, I don't see why they would go for him unless it's just to stick it to the Knicks for beating them in the playoffs this year, which would be the ultimate petty move. So good for them if they do it. And then the Spurs, I think, just based off having Wembanyama and what a force he is, maybe wouldn't want to. I mean, maybe they would, I guess, if they want to do like a 2 big lineup with those two and just kind of be like, oh, well, Wemby plays like a wing anyway on offense, and then you have 2 fantastic defenders out there. Maybe you want to go with that, but I feel like his future is being the center of that team.
He was so much better this year when Zach Collins was taken out of the lineup and he got to just play center.
Exactly. So it's like, I don't see why they would want to move backwards that way. But those are the only teams that I would reasonably rule out, I think. I mean, the rest of them, OKC definitely scares me the most. I think there's a logical fit there. Like I could see, unlike with Wemby, I could see maybe wanting to protect Chet a little more. Just because I think that he's not quite as developed physically as Wembanyama is yet. Like, I don't know how comfortable he is, like, being a full-time center, and maybe you want to have him kind of shift to the 4 because he has the ball handling ability and the shooting ability and everything else, but not quite the rebounding ability. So that would help just their team rebounding in general to get Hartenstein out there, and, then wouldn't hurt your spacing in theory because you still have a sweet shooting 7-footer out there at the 4. who can move really well and can play great defense. And again, you have two fantastic defenders out there. And with that amount of money, like they could still go get someone else afterwards too. So they could potentially get Hartenstein and then still make another move to continue filling out their roster. So I would say OKC definitely scares me the most out of anybody.
Yeah, so here's the thing with the Thunder. They made a pretty strong statement at the trade deadline, right? That and all season, like this is what Sam Presti fell back on when he was asked about this. He said, we want 5 guys out there who can pass, dribble, and shoot. And they could have, even on the cheap, gone and gotten Andre Drummond. They could have outbid the Mavericks for Daniel Gafford. In fact, the Mavericks used a Thunder pick to facilitate that trade that the Thunder gave them for a future pick swap to make that trade happen and kind of ultimately sign their own demise. So the question is, like, how much did that Mavericks series that was very competitive, despite Jalen Williams not playing very well, shake their core belief that like Chet is a center and we are going to be at our best if we can get like the floor completely spread around Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. By the way, this is a tangent, but I've thought about it a lot this year. Imagine Jalen Brunson in that offense with like legitimate full-time 5-out spacing, like could put up some Shai Gilgeous-Alexander type of numbers. I don't know. I'm just saying I might be a homer. But I do think that series might have shaken them a little bit. And the great thing about Hartenstein is like he does give you some of that, right? Because he is such a good passer. He's comfortable playing on the perimeter. And like if I were them, the approach I would take is like while Chet gets stronger, and also I think like you hope Chet continues to become a better shooter because that'll open up those lineups even more down the road. Like I would have someone like Hartenstein as an innings eater. And if you give him like that 25 million a year, but you only make it for 3 years, like you have a pretty healthy window there to like let Chet develop, but have someone who's going to make sure he's not getting beaten up all season. And if you get into a matchup like they did with the Mavs, where they were just getting bullied, like you have a pivot to go to. So I hate to make this argument, but I do think it makes a good amount of sense. My only source of hesitation there is like, is Chet just a little bit less effective playing the 4? And also, like, do you lose like his rim protection, which is probably the single best thing that he brings to the table with him having to play out on the perimeter a little bit more? And look, Hartenstein can do that in some matchups on some guys, but you're almost like, I don't know if you're getting the full bang for your buck having both those guys out there at the same time. And the other thing was like Chet shooting awesome in the regular season, 37% on pretty low volume. Like it didn't really translate to the playoffs. So Chet's like a pretty good shooter for a big and not like a Miles Turner-esque or Joel Embiid-esque, like elite shooter for a big. Like do those lineups just not have the spacing that the Thunder want in the playoffs? So I think there's going to be some hesitation before they go all in on Hartenstein. But you know what? They have the money. And here's the thing, like to your point, like if they sign Hartenstein and then the time comes to give all those other guys their big extension, they could probably always trade him. So I could see them going for it.
Yeah, I think another team that scares me a bit too is the Jazz. They as we mentioned, they have 38 million, or potentially 38 million. So a little more than OKC to spend even, and there is a lot coming out right now about them wanting to potentially start building around marketing, like actually, and try to really compete next year. And so if that's the case, I don't know, Walker Kessler, I'd be lying if I said I watched him all the time, but like I had him in fantasy, I can tell you that much. And his stat lines were like mind-boggling because some nights he would be like, he'd have 8 blocks in the first 10 minutes of a game, and other games he would have like 1, 1, 1, 1, and 1. Like he seems to me like he's still fairly inconsistent. They
also started starting John Collins, so that was the other big thing there. That like his minutes were way like surprisingly down from what was an all-time rookie year defensively.
Yeah. So I mean, maybe they don't feel super confident in him just yet, or at all, to be like a full-time starting center. But I mean, they could sort of do similar to what the Knicks are doing a bit and be like, hey, we'll throw him out there as the backup behind Hartenstein. And then you've got, 48 minutes of good rim protection and pretty good rebounding and all that. I mean, that seems attractive to me if I were a Jazz fan. And honestly, like they'd probably have to throw a bit more, but like they might be one of those teams that would be the one that would be like, sure, we'll do 25 million average value over 4 years and give you $100 million contract. Like, cause you kind of have to do that if you're the Jazz. But if they did that, that could be dangerous for the Knicks, honestly.
I think he's a great fit there, and I think that's a great call by you because, like, when you want to get serious, like, where do teams start when they want to get serious? Defense. And Isaiah Hartenstein was, even though he wasn't recognized as such, like, probably a top 10 defensive player in basketball last year, and like that is partially because centers are just inherently more valuable than other positions. But like he can, I think, single-handedly come in and push your defense up, I don't know, 5 to 7 spots in the standings, which is like just a very short list of guys in the league who could do that. And I think he makes them a playoff team. And if there's urgency there for them to get serious and become a playoff team, like he's sort of a one-man army. The one other team I think we both wanted to touch on was the Orlando Magic, who tried to sign him last time and apparently offered more money than the Knicks did. And he ultimately picked the Knicks because he wanted to be in a winning situation. Now they are obviously much more equipped to make that a winning situation. As dirty as their defense was this year, he could make them like pretty much what the Wolves were this year, which is just like a historically good defense. I think the one thing with them is like, do they want to keep Wendell Carter, who can hit threes on a team that is just utterly bereft of shooting and is claustrophobic possession in, possession out, Alex? Do they want to double down and make things even more claustrophobic by trading in a 3-point shooting center for one who does it maybe a couple times a year?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, they'd have to just be like really buying into what he did with the Clippers when he shot like 37% or whatever, but it was only on like 1.5 attempts per game, if I remember correctly.
14 for 30, if I think. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it was a small amount, or yeah, maybe it was even a half attempt per game. Like it was not that often, but like it was enough to make you go like, oh, maybe it could happen. I mean, maybe that's what they try with him. Maybe they buy in, but I don't know. I mean, he took a couple with the Knicks and like he barely ever hits them. Like it's just not. It doesn't really seem to be his game anymore. Maybe they would empower him to have that be his game, and I feel like that would be kind of a misuse of him at this point because we've seen just how dominant he can be when you just kind of have him be inside and try to get those offensive rebounds and all that stuff. And maybe that's just what they lean into. Is just like, well, we'll just kind of do what the Knicks did a couple years ago and just like, even if our percentages kind of are not great, we'll just have him in there to clean it up and, make layups and call it a day. Now they also wouldn't have a Josh Hart, which was a key part of that too. But, maybe they say like, oh, Paolo can get rebounds and finish or whatever, as long as Hartenstein's handling the dirty work and all that good stuff. So maybe that's what they do. Maybe they play a little copycat. But Gavin, I think we should take our final little break here and get into in the next segment what the Knicks can do here. Like we've gone over the numbers a little bit, but just talk about how limited they are, why they're limited. If people didn't listen to like our salary cap primer or whatever, get into some of the reasons that the Knicks are going to be fighting a little bit of an uphill battle here, unless Isaiah Hartenstein really is just committed to the team and wants to stay with them, because he might have to potentially leave a lot of money on the table to stay with the Knicks. So we'll get into that in just a second here. But first, we got to let you know about our good friends over at FanDuel. It's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. And obviously, the story right now is the NBA Finals coming up, and Game 1 plus 200 for the Mavs right now, I think. Let me double check that before I... Yep, plus 200 as of the time of recording for the Mavs at the Celtics. I don't know. I made the case on the last episode. Like, I think the Mavs have been fighting an uphill battle this whole postseason. The Celtics have not really been challenged yet. So maybe you just run into a case of one team fighting for their lives, still in that mode, and another team that's been kind of coasting. And maybe the Mavs steal Game 1. I don't know. But for plus 200 odds, seems like a pretty solid bet to me. I don't know. I wouldn't call it like a slam dunk or anything, but if you want to throw your $5 towards it, maybe that's a solid way to go. So if you want to do that, visit FanDuel.com/locked on and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, Gavin, we're back in to keep talking through this Isaiah Hartenstein free agency. We've gone over, obviously, the teams that could poach him. We've gone over what the rumors are about the dollars he could command, but we haven't really gone into great detail yet about what his contract or potential contract would look like with the Knicks. So again, we did do sort of actually we've done a couple episodes that have touched on this already, but it bears mentioning again. So the Knicks can offer him 4 years and about $72.5 million. So the way that basically works out is the first year of the contract would pay him, I believe, $16.2 million, which I am going back to look. Yes. So his starting salary would be about 16.2 million. And then what's different, like you might be looking at that and being like, oh my God, the Knicks are totally screwed. Like they were, those other teams could offer him an average value of 25 million, and that's 16. That's a 10 million a season difference. The reason it's not quite that much is because the Knicks do have the ability to offer him 8% raises year over year, which is a valuable commodity. That means that they can get him paid more quicker each year, because the standard amount that a player can be raised if they're signing with a new team in free agency is 5% raises year over year. So that's the advantage that the Knicks get from having his early bird rights. Now, that's the rub, of course, is that as far as just his actual base salary, the reason they can only give him 4 years and 72.5 million is because with early bird rights, that's I'll give the brief explainer again. I did a really long explainer on this a couple weeks ago, but more or less, if you're with a team for 3 years or on the same contract for 3 years, I should say, then you have what's called bird rights. And that means whatever team you end that contract with has the ability to go over the salary cap to pay you basically whatever they want. But because Isaiah Hartenstein signed with the Knicks 2 seasons ago and has only been with them 2 years, he has what's called early bird rights, which means that the Knicks, as a starting salary, can only pay him 175% of what he made on the final year of his contract currently. And since that contract paid him, it was like 9.8 million or something this past year, if I'm not mistaken, because it was a 2-year deal that increased his pay year over year, then that means they can only start him off at that 16.2 number. So yeah, that's basically where we're at, Gavin. But I don't know, like Leon Rose has worked some magic before as far as getting guys to sign for what I would say is way less than what they're worth, starting with Julius Randle a few years back. And I mean, Dante DiVincenzo, I think there was rumors that he had some slightly better offers out there, but took the Knicks offer. Josh Hart could have hit a huge free agency for him last summer and instead opted into a very affordable final year of his deal to sign an extension with the Knicks. Like, Leon Rose has a way of getting these things done, but do you think, I don't know, maybe do we want to play the percentage game or something? Like, what do you think the chances are here that Hartenstein leaves potentially anywhere from 10 to $27 million on the table?
Yeah, I think I would take the Knicks over any other single landing spot, but I would say 45% Knicks, 55% the field, just because it's so much money to leave on the table, to your point, like that he could be giving up 8 million a year. And there is a world where here's what Leon Rose could do and could say that is within the bounds of legality. And that is all right, like take like a 3-year deal, like player option on the 3rd year. And then like, we promise we're going to take care of you after. And to me, like that almost implicitly is what a few of these guys have done. I mean, even like you didn't even mention Deuce, like even at the time, 3 for 13, we were like, all right, like I don't know if he's ultimately going to be a rotation guy or not, but like that is pennies in the NBA these days. And you see how that one's aged. There is something, I've made Mafia references before. There's some way that Leon Rose is encouraging these guys. And like, personally, as someone who roots for this team, I don't want to dive too deep into what that may or may not be, but it's going to be tough. I think he wants to stay here. I think if the money was equal, like I'd feel very similar to how I feel about OG Anunoby, where I don't think there's a lot of ambiguity there. And I don't think there's a lot of doubt there. I think it would be tough for him to not go to a really great franchise like the Thunder and make $8 million more per year, because there's just no guarantees. Like even if Leon Rose says, all right, we're gonna make good on your next one, like what if the Knicks have to trade him in like a star deal? And like, it's like, all right, sorry, buddy, didn't work out. So it sucks to say this. He would be smart to take the money. If he doesn't, that's an all-time win. And Leon Rose is a freaking magician.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm of the same mind. It does just seem like Leon is good at saying, hey, like, I mean, I don't know if it's just a pitch of like, hey, like, how much do you really love this team and what we're doing here? Because you could continue being part of it if you take less money, and we'll get you more money later on. But like for now, this is all we can do. Um, and I think there is a decent chance that maybe then Hartenstein does just do, I mean, maybe even a 1-and-1 deal. And I think there's a chance that maybe they just say, hey, like, this is all we could pay you is the starting salary to begin with. So just do a 1-year deal. We'll give you a 2nd-year player option. That way, like if, God forbid you get hurt or something this year, you can pick that option up and make that money, and no matter what, have that guaranteed, pay for the year after for, and then come back strong or whatever. But, otherwise you could just opt out, hit free agency next summer, and we'll pay you for real next summer, because then you'll
Would
have
the
full
Knicks
bird
have
rights.
bird? Oh, okay, so they would have bird rights at that
Yes.
point, even though it's not a continuous contract. Okay, got it.
So the way that works is like, yeah, sorry, I maybe phrased that a little confusingly. It's if you're 3 years consecutively with the same team,
Gotcha.
or you spend 3 years on a single contract, and then the rights transfer around. So
Perfect.
so like if the Knicks like re-signed Hartenstein to a 1+1, and then he, they for whatever reason traded him this year, that next team would inherit full bird rights with him, because he had been 3 years with the Knicks prior to that and was on a contract. At least that's my understanding of the rule. So it's like all about like basically the only thing that resets it is if you sign away from the team you're currently with a new team, then your bird clock resets. That's basically the one rule there. So yeah, I mean, it's just going to come down to like, can Leon pull off another relative coup? And I'm kind of with you. I mean, yeah, I'm almost at like 50-50 or even like 55-45 Knicks. Like it doesn't feel like he's going to go, but maybe we're just looking at it through fan colored glasses. And obviously neither of us want him to go because they played so well with him on the roster. But I don't know, something about it just feels like this whole group, the way they talk about each other, the way that they play together, everything else, it kind of feels like they're all just saying, and they're being led by example by like Jalen Brunson, who's probably, it sounds like, as if you listen to the Roommates show the other day, there was like a little exchange between him and Josh Hart where Josh Hart was like, yo, what about you with your extension? And like talking about it like it was a done deal already. And Brunson was like, what do you mean? There's no extension yet. Like, whatever, because they can't have the people thinking that they're coming to agreements early. But, it seems like he's about to lead by example and take way less than what he's worth as like a undeniable at this point, top 10, top 5, possibly player in the NBA. And, so maybe everybody just follows suit. I don't know, but it'll be interesting to see. I kind of think that Hartenstein is the one most likely, if we're talking about like him and Anunoby this summer, he's the one most likely, I think, that'll take less than what he's worth. Whereas Anunoby, I think maybe will look to maximize himself, especially given his health record and everything, and squeeze whatever he can get out of the Knicks. But my inclination as of right now is both of them will end up back with the Knicks, which, I mean, for anyone that made it this far, in our next episode, I think we're going to lead with one of our mailbag questions from last week that will include some OG Anunoby talk and a little bit about his situation too.
Yeah, and I'm excited to get into it. Let's keep this team together. They're really good. He's Alex. I'm Gavin. On that happy note, we'll talk to you soon on Locked On Knicks.